But thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for coming out on this super yucky night. As I was driving up here, I was like, oh no, I hope people come, because it's like spitting snow and sleet, and I swear it was beautiful when I was loading my van to get up here. And then by the time we got halfway up the expressway, I was like, oh boy, no, it's a winter April day. But here we are, and thank you again for making it and for having me. It sounds like you guys have tons of stuff happening with the Euclid Art Association. Just out of curiosity, how many of you enter pieces in shows, all these opportunities? All right, so you guys are pretty good participators also. Not only do you have opportunities, but you have people who take advantage of those. So that's really a good sign of the health of your organization. So anyway, it's just neat to be here and be a part of that tonight. I'm going to share a little bit about what I do. I've got some samples of my work, a couple pieces here, one piece here, and a giant one over there next to my handsome husband. That one wasn't gonna fit on an easel, so I just stuck it over there. But that can kind of give you an idea of what I do. I have a handout for you, so you should have gotten that. On the whiteboard, I pretty much have the same information. That's just going to be for me to kind of reference as I talk. And I'm going to do a little bit of telling you about myself, telling you about my art, giving you some tips, some insight, some glimpse behind the scenes into my process. I'm going to demo a couple things, and then I'll take questions. I'll have questions at the end, but truly in the middle, if you think of a question while I'm doing something or when I say something, just raise your hand and I'd be happy to answer questions in the middle of the presentation part as well. With that being said, I'll tell you a little about myself. So again, my name is Laura Rath. I'm born and raised in Akron, Ohio. I've been in Northeast Ohio my entire life. My husband, Tim, who comes with me on many art activities, he's my art sidekick, art show tent setter-upper and carrier of heavy things, and now videographer. I know, he's the muscle behind the whole process. But the two of us, we live in Stowe. We've been there about 25 years. We have 4 sons. My oldest son, he just got married a couple years ago, and he and his wife also live in Stowe. I still have 3 sons at home, and they are all 3 college students at the University of Akron. So there's people coming and going in my home all the time. I kind of joke it's a little like living in a frat house with all these boys and their friends and food and all that stuff. But it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun being in that environment. And in the midst of all that, I find as many opportunities as I can to make art, because I really love making paintings. And so it's something that I really prioritize how I choose to spend my time. Let's see what else. My art, I guess I've got some examples that I've pointed out. What I usually do is paint with very thick oil paint. People always ask if I add anything to the oil paint or do anything to the canvas before I apply the paint. It's really just a whole lot of paint. So the presentation tonight, I think, is titled like Texture Landscape Paintings. The big secret, if I give you the spoiler, is just use a lot of paint. That's really the big secret. I teach art now, and I have students who sometimes squirt out like a dime-sized amount of paint, and they try to apply it, and then they say, I can't get it to look like yours. And I'm like, well, because you didn't use any paint. You have to squirt out what I call a healthy quantity of paint. And I will demonstrate that a little bit, and you'll be like, wow, that's more than I would consider a healthy quantity. But you need to use a lot of paint to get that thick, textured look. What I love about oil paints is that they are so vibrant. They hold their color so well. And when you use a lot of thick paint, you can kind of do some sculpting with the paint. And so that is, that was part of what was mentioned in my bio. I love that ability to sculpt the paint as I apply it. So I'm not only painting with the color and the line and the shapes, but I'm also creating the image with like a 3D effect that's actually 3D, that's actually coming off of the canvas. So I hope you get a chance, after this to come up and really, look closely at my paintings. This one over here with the flowers in the front is especially kind of 3-dimensional in nature, but it's really just best appreciated up close in person. And you'll notice that these don't look like scenes of Northeast Ohio. I occasionally I will paint a local scene from, around here, but a lot of my subject matter comes from my travels. So my husband and I, we love to travel. We have been fortunate enough to travel in Europe a fair amount, and I studied French in high school and college, so France has a particular appeal to me because I can go and use the language, and also France is where a lot of the great painters came from, and really touring all over France, it's no surprise that so many of the world's most famous artists found inspiration there because there's so much inspiration to have. So I really love visiting a lot of the same places that inspired artists that I've always admired. So I take photos when we travel. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, do you paint plein air ever?
I don't really paint plein air. I have done a little bit of that, but really because I do a lot of the painting from my travels, I really don't have the time to be over there and, sit and paint. And so I have to kind of be as efficient as possible during my travel time and visit as many places as I can and take as many photos as I can. I'll take thousands of photos. And, I still have kids at home, even though they're pretty big these days. Over the years, I've still had kids at home, so I can't go for like huge amounts of time. I'm going for like a week and a half. And so every day is really kind of jam-packed trying to find, these scenes that will be paintings. So I come home from the trips and I sort through all the photos and I put them in folders on my computer, which ones, might be considered to be paintings in the future. And then that's my source every time I need a new composition idea. I go to those folders. And the variety of scenes that I paint, I kind of think that I have like three main varieties. And I suppose everybody kind of does because I have like the ocean scene down there is strictly a landscape. There's no structures in it. It's just nature. It's just the ocean. And so it's very loose. You can be a little imprecise with it. Then kind of the polar opposite of that would be like this little piece here, which is more newly completed, so it's not yet framed, but it is dry, thankfully. If you've used oils, they take forever to dry. But this is Rouen, France. It's like the Normandy area of France, and it's the opposite of just a plain landscape. It's really just a plain cityscape. It's an old medieval era style town, but there's not really any greenery or nature, apart from the sky. Yes?
Do you entitle your paintings?
How do I title the paintings? Do I title them? Yes, yeah, I do give them names. So on my website, I have paintings, and they always have a name that go with them. When I display them in shows, they have a name. I can see how so many, paintings in museums have very simple names, like, girl with the pearl earring, just something. And sometimes you're like, wow, they couldn't come up with something more creative. But when you really make so many paintings, you start to just kind of like understand how simple names are appealing. So I've got nature scenes. I've got the opposite of that, very non-nature structure, man-made scenes. And then something like this one that's kind of in the middle, this cafe scene. This is kind of a combination, and it's mostly the kind of style what I paint. I usually like a combination of structure and nature. And in this instance here, it's primarily structure with a little bit of nature. There's a little bit of, greenery with the bushes and then the trees in the distance. The one over here on the pew next to my husband, that's also that combination of nature and structure, but it's kind of flipped where the structure is a small piece and the nature is a dominant element in it. So that's actually Monet's home at Giverny. I was there in October, and thankfully the flowers were all still in bloom. I was afraid that they would not be, but France is more temperate than Ohio, and so the flowers were still in bloom, and it was still a beautiful time.
When you're taking all these pictures, are you using your phone or do you have a special camera?
I usually just use my phone. Yeah, so that's a good question because, sometimes you might think that you need like a really expensive, fancy camera, but really we like to travel as light as possible. And, I just want to take like a carry-on if I can, or a backpack, a day bag, and my phone, and just be very light on our feet so we can just go wherever we need to go and see new places. So my phone is always with me, and it really is sufficient for taking the pictures. Yeah. Any other questions?
I don't know if you answered this already, about how many photos can you estimate that you take on these trips?
Over about if I have a 7-day trip, it's about 2,000 photos.
Wow.
So I do take quite a few pictures, and thankfully my dear husband is fairly patient. He's usually pretty good about it. Occasionally, there are some days where he's like, enough of that scene. Like, can we move on? He's standing there while I'm like, I need to get it from all the different angles, and I need, the same scene. Yeah, we were in Belgium. We were in Belgium. In Bruges at one time, and I wanted to get this really specific scene with this canal, and I wanted to get it at like the golden hour, like just when the sun was like going down, and we were there too early, and so we were standing there and standing there and standing there and standing there, and he was like, they're selling hot wine down the street, and I was like, you go get some hot wine, leave me here, I'm waiting for the lighting to be right. He did come back, and he had hot wine, so he was in a better mood, and I got the picture. So that's how we make it work. But yeah, lots of travel, lots of photos. And like I said, I generally prefer that combination of structure and nature in most of my scenes. My style is inspired by my love of Impressionist art. Even when I was a kid, I loved Impressionist art. Like a lot of the young girls when I was like 10, 11, 12, my friends, they had pictures from teenage magazines with like boy band guys, cute boys on the wall. I had pictures of Monet artwork on my bedroom wall when I was like 12 years old. My room was covered with art. I would go to the Cleveland Art Museum, and every time I'd have to go to the gift shop and come home with a new poster. And I'd ask for art books for holidays. So even when I was a young kid, the art always appealed to me, especially the Impressionists. So all that has kind of tied into my style that I've developed, but I would say that I lean a little bit more realistic than many Impressionists. And so I think that if you had to really categorize me as a genre, I would say I'm like a realistic Impressionist. I include more detail than many Impressionists do. I still love that play of light and movement and thick brush strokes. The changing light with different conditions. I love all that the Impressionists bring, and some of the looseness, but I also do tend to include some extra level of detail that strict Impressionists often wouldn't include. So I think I'd be a realistic Impressionist. And let's see, where else am I going with that? I think that about sums up my style. I guess going back then to my childhood of how I became an artist in the first place, I did have an art show when I was 5 years old. I grew up in a house, I was an only child, and my dad was a chemical engineer and an inventor. My mom was a musician. And so my house was full of music and invention and creativity and thinking outside the box, and every quirky thing you could imagine we had going on in our house. And so, as a kid, I just rolled with that and developed all kinds of artistic, interests as a result. And when I was 5 years old, I used to make these elaborate paper sculptures. I wish they were still in existence somewhere. I don't know if they're in my parents' basement or what, but I would make tons of these little sculptures. And the local library allowed me to fill their cases with all of my sculptures. And then they had like a little show with me, and they took my picture, and I had a little French braid. I remember that. It was such a neat experience. But that was the first art show of what down the road would turn into a whole lot more. But as a kid, I was always into all the artsy stuff. When I went to high school, I would do all kinds of creative video work for my high school. And then somewhere along the transition point of high school to college, I think there was probably some rebellion, which most teenagers go through as they're, figuring out who they are in the world. And I kind of started to shy away from all that artsy stuff. And instead of wanting to think outside of the box, I was kind of finding inside the box to be more appealing. And so like reason, logic, order, organization, a lot of the stuff that I felt was maybe missing from my younger years, I leaned into math and science and those kind of fields really strong. And then I ended up becoming a math and science teacher. So I taught 4th and 5th grade students in Greene, Ohio, so just a little south from here. And then not long after I started doing that, my husband and I got married. Not long after that, we started our family. And not long after that, all 4 kids, it was like they're 5.5 years from the oldest to the youngest. So there's a lot of kids being added constantly, and teaching and everything else, really, I had to hit the brakes on, and I stayed home and raised my boys. And that has been the best job of my life. I absolutely loved all those years doing that. And then as my kids started to move toward middle school, I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel and started to realize that they're getting more independent and there needs to be another chapter for me because the necessity of having me home all the time was kind of wrapping up. And so I kind of had a little bit of a crisis, I'd say, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I really didn't feel called to go back to teaching math and science. I felt like something was different and that just wasn't as appealing as it once was. And then I thought maybe I'd go back to college, get some completely different degree. I was really kind of clueless for a bit. And then a friend sent me a message kind of out of the blue and said, hey, I heard at this local art center, it was the Valley Art Center in Chagrin Falls. She said, I heard at this local art center that they're offering painting classes. You should sign up. And so I had not ever considered doing that. And I thought, well, I have neither the time nor the money to take up a new hobby. You know, I'm busy with 4 young kids still. Like, this is just not going to happen. And I mentioned it to my husband, and he was like, I think you should do this. And that kind of surprised me. And it kind of appealed to me. So I was like, all right, I'll sign up. So I bought all the supplies, and I showed up to that first class. And 2 things happened. One, I was instantly in love with oil paints. It was really like my first solid experience with them. The way they came out of the tube, the way they moved across the canvas, the way I could sculpt them with a palette knife, like that was just fascinating. The way the colors interacted with each other, all of that I was just completely enamored with. The other thing that happened, though, was that I realized I was completely overwhelmed because everyone in the class was amazing. This was not a basic level class. I jumped in deep into an open studio style class, and so the guy next to me was working on a commission that he was getting paid to do. And it was like 6 feet tall and amazing. And there was me with my brand new canvas, and I'm taking my paints out of the package, you know, and my brushes have no stains on them because they just got delivered from Blick. So I was completely just like drowning fast. And fortunately, I had a teacher who really felt like he saw some ability in me and was exceptionally encouraging and cheered me on and was like, you've got this, just don't quit, just keep going. And I did kind of a deep dive of independent study between every class. We met once a week, and the remaining 6 days in between sessions, I was watching everything I could, I was practicing everything I could, I was reading everything I could. And so I felt like I was getting 7 days of painting instruction, even though I was only going to class for one of those days.
So how long ago was that?
So this was about 10 years ago. So it's really not all that long ago.
Was it Rob Crombie?
It was Rob Crombie. Do you know Rob?
Yeah.
He is a very good friend. Yeah, Rob is a very good friend of ours now. And he really cheered me on in the beginning when I was like, oh, wow, I don't know if I belong here. And his encouragement really kept me going and gave me some hope that this was something I could learn to do. So I don't have the art pedigree that, you know, some people can say like, oh, I have a master's in fine arts or a BFA. And, you know, I don't have that. I have a non-traditional route of getting here. But then again, as an artist, I think artists are well known for doing things in non-traditional ways. So maybe that's the traditional way of actually being an artist. So anyway, that's how my path has kind of unfolded. And since then, though, I've actually turned this into a real profession. I went from 10 years ago not knowing how to paint anything to now I've done lots of juried shows. I've done lots of solo shows. I've done the outdoor tent shows in the summer. This summer, I'll be at Chagrin Falls. I have those listed at the bottom of your paper. Chagrin Falls and Hudson's Art on the Green. I'm hoping to line up a couple more, so those things are still being determined. But those are the 2 I've got so far. Now I teach art, which kind of blows my mind because I'm like 10 years ago, I didn't even know how to make art. And now I'm the person that teaches people how to make art. And it's so cool to be on the other side of that and to see people come into my class as scared as I was when I came to that first class and doubting their own ability. And me being able to cheer them on and help the lights go off when they're like, oh my gosh, I think I can do this. That has been so rewarding.
Do you teach at the Valley Art Center or do you teach out of your own home?
No, I teach at the Peninsula Art Academy.
Peninsula.
Yeah, so it's about just shy of 40 minutes from here. But I've been teaching at the Peninsula Art Academy.
There it is, right there.
So yeah, I have at the bottom a little bit of information about that. So I do have a new intro class that'll be starting the end of May, but I teach an intro to oil painting, intermediate oil painting, and then I have an open studio for oils and acrylics. So that one is open to both mediums for people who are a little more independent. Did you have a question? Fondness for particular colors? Yeah, I do love blue. I do love like natural green. The burnt sienna is also a favorite color of mine. But the blue and the sap green and probably burnt sienna, those are very commonly used colors in my palette. Any other questions before I move on? All right, you guys are great. I love that you have some questions and some thoughts. All right, so now I want to move a little bit into a glimpse into my process and maybe give you some tips that may be helpful to you as well in your process. The first thing that I need to do each time that I paint, and this is true for all of us, is you need to choose a composition to paint, right? I've already shared that my composition inspiration almost always comes from photos that I have taken. If I do a commission piece for somebody, I like to sit down with them and hear why the photo they chose was important to them. I always like to have an emotional connection to whatever picture it is that I'm painting. And I feel like there's a difference between just painting a pretty picture and really making art. And so I'm really trying to make art. And I feel like there's an intangible human emotional element that goes into that. And the first time that I really kind of discovered that was even a thing, it was the first juried show that I had ever entered. And I had won an honorable mention. And so I was thrilled because this was a totally new experience for me. And a couple weeks later, they were going to have a jurors talk where the jurors were going to choose 3 paintings that they had awarded something to, and they were going to talk about their rationale for why they chose those paintings. Well, I had won something, but it was only an honorable mention, so I was pretty sure they were going to talk about, best of show, first place, second place, third place, those kind of places, not mine, since they were only covering 3. And we went to this event, and lo and behold, my painting was one of the 3 that they talked about. And that blew me away. But what most blew me away was the juror who was speaking said that they chose to award my painting something because they could feel the artist's heart and the artist's voice. And I was like, well, I didn't know I put any heart and voice. I thought I just put paint on there. I don't know about this heart and voice stuff, but I remember hearing that and feeling like that meant something to me, that there was something intangible that I had added to my painting without even realizing it. And it kind of created like a dialogue or a communication with the people who were viewing my painting. Like they felt they knew something about me, and I didn't realize that I was putting part of me on the canvas. I thought I was just painting pretty pictures. And so that was kind of a moment that made me realize, like, okay, I need to be really careful about what I choose to paint. It needs to be something that I do have an emotional connection to, because clearly my feelings, my meanness, it plays out somehow in my brush strokes. And so choosing a composition has become like a really big deal to me. I feel like, I can wake up on Monday morning and say, all right, I'm going to paint today. I'm going to start something new. And I might go to my computer and look at those folders of all the pictures that I've taken, and possibly nothing leaps out at me. Even though they're great pictures and I, chose them, I thought they were going to be good paintings, on Monday, maybe none of them appeal. And if I don't feel that like emotional tug when I look at any of the pictures, I know I'm not going to paint today, or at least not right now. And I walk away, close it all down. Maybe a couple hours later, I'll go back and I'll sit and I'll look through the same pictures. And if nothing hits me, if nothing stirs kind of in my soul, where I feel an urge to paint it, I may wait a day or two even, and then just keep repeating the process. And then lo and behold, I will go back to those same pictures and look, and suddenly something will leap out, and I'll be like, oh, that orange awning is striking. I really want to spend a lot of time on that. And then that becomes the painting that I choose to paint. So I encourage my students, when they're choosing something to paint for my class, don't just choose a pretty picture. Like, choose something that stirs in your heart, that like churns up some emotion. because that emotion, that human element is such an important ingredient in making what I would say is real art. Sometimes people will come to class and they have like a page from their calendar that they just, like they have a page a day calendar, and those are fine. You know, if that's a scene that really like appeals to you, that can be a great painting. But if you've just chosen it kind of robotically, like, oh, I need a picturesque scene, this'll do, and you take a page off that page a day calendar, it doesn't do. It isn't. It's going to be hard to put much of yourself in it if you genuinely don't care about that scene to begin with. So choosing a composition is an important step in the process. The next step I would call pre-painting, and all this is on your handout. And pre-painting as a term kind of echoes back to my days as a math and science teacher. I taught 4th and 5th graders, and when we would do a science topic, like let's say we're going to read a book about dinosaurs, I would pick up the book about dinosaurs and show the class, and we would do a strategy called pre-reading. I would hold up the book, we would make some judgments about the cover. Does this look like a fiction book? Does this look like a nonfiction book? What kind of questions do we think will get answered by reading this book? What kind of questions can you think you'd like to get answered? We would just kind of be warming up our brains to engage with the content. And that was pre-reading. I feel like pre-painting is much the same thing, except we're engaging with the content of what it is we're going to paint. And it's the warm-up. It's like, you know, you go to the gym and you work out, and it's tempting to skip the stretching before you work out, and you just want to get to the workout. But that stretching also has value. And so pre-painting is the step of the process that I consider warming up your brain before you're about to dive into painting, so that you can paint intelligently, I suppose. And the first step of pre-painting is making observations. And this is another echo back to my science teaching days. I taught the scientific method with 4th and 5th graders, and we did a lot of experiments. And the first step of the scientific method was making observations. And so to be able to carry out an experiment well, you had to be as observant as possible and know what you were trying to test and why. And so with art, I feel like it's much the same way. When you look at your reference photo, or if you're on plein air and you're painting outside and you look at the scene that's in front of you, you're really trying to absorb and digest and observe as much as possible so that you can translate that experience into paint. You want to see, where's the light coming from? How are the shadows laying across the ground? Are they long shadows? Are they short shadows? Are they really distinct? Are they diffuse? Are there objects that are overlapping other objects? All of that kind of stuff, the more you think through and notice visually, the more you can translate into paint. And then that will make a better painting. And so that making observations thing is a big part of what I teach. In fact, I give my students, after they've chosen their composition, they get a worksheet from me, and it has a whole bunch of questions. It's got like 10 questions, much like the ones that I just, shared with you. And I give them a pen and I say, all right, we're going to work for like 15 minutes, and I want you to just look at your photo and answer all these questions. What do you see in the photo that you're about to paint? Then once you have made observations and you feel like you understand what you're painting, then you're going to plan your palette. And that refers to the colors. Oh, one last kind of a funny story with the observations that I wanted to share with you. So years ago, I had painted this really big scene of Amsterdam, and it was like a busy street side scene with like people and bicycles and just the hustle and bustle of Amsterdam. And I had not been super observant. I had been looking at my reference photo and looking at my canvas and kind of matching the shapes and the shapes and the colors and the colors and the lines without really thinking too intelligently about what I was painting. And so I was done with it, and someone looked at it and said, wow, that's amazing. You even included the porta potty. And I was like, I didn't paint a porta potty. And he was like, yeah, there's a porta potty right there. And I was like, well, let me look at the reference photo. And I looked at the reference photo, and lo and behold, I had painted a porta potty right in the middle of my Amsterdam scene. So
Dead center.
Dead center. It's dead center. It's actually a very pretty blue. So maybe I would have chosen to include it anyway, but it was a little embarrassing that here I painted a structure, I didn't even realize what it was. And so I tell my students all the time, sometimes they'll bring a photo and they're like, yeah, I want to paint this cool waterfall scene, but then there's some strange shape off to the side. And I'm like, what is that? Is that like your finger in front of the camera? Is that a wall? Is that a building? And they're like, I don't know. And I said, well, if you don't know, you're not going to really be able to paint it because you can't just copy the shape. You need to kind of know what you're painting in order to paint it effectively and intelligently so it can be understood by whoever's viewing it. So anyway, be cautious of what you're painting, or you might end up painting a porta potty in the middle of one of your scenes.
Leave it in?
What's that?
Did you leave it in or?
I did leave the porta potty in. Yeah, it is a nice little pop of blue. Yeah, I do like it, but it was a little bit humorous that I didn't plan to do that. So the next step then would be planning your palette. You've chosen well, you've got a composition, and kind of humorously, my palette, this evening I brought a paper plate, but really anytime I paint, I use a paper plate. I love paper plates for painting, and in fact, sometimes I'll be painting and then I'll take another paper plate on top and it kind of makes like a clamshell, and it doesn't insulate them, from drying out forever, but I feel like it kind of maintains my paints a little bit longer than if they were just exposed to the air. So as far as an actual palette, I do love paper plates. But choosing your colors before you paint is really helpful. And you'll notice on your handout, kind of on the bottom corner, there's a picture of these little cards. And so I have the little cards right here. This is my little bin of painting recipe cards. Does anybody have anything like this? Okay, we've got someone. All right. Well, so when I first started painting, the most frustrating thing to me was wasting paint. And raise your hand if you've used oil paints before. Any oil painters? All right, so we've got some people with some oil experience. Those oil paints, they're expensive. You do not want to squirt out a whole bunch and choose poorly and have to, dump it and start again, or mix a bunch together and just make mud that just doesn't really work. You want to be able to choose color with confidence. And so I was getting so frustrated that I just felt like I was blowing through paint, or I would make the perfect color on Monday, and then Wednesday I decided to add to it, and I was like, oh, how in the world did I make that on Monday? I could never make it again.
That's why I have them.
Yes. And so I came up with this idea of making these recipe cards. Just like when I cook, I had 4 sons, so cooking mealtime has been a very important thing in our household for the last 25 years. Hungry boys need to eat on time, and the food needs to be predictably good. So I realized that worked much the same with the paint colors. The paint needs to be able to be mixed efficiently, and it needs to be exactly what I'm looking for. So I made all these little cards, and I painted them edge to edge and mixed equal parts of colors. If I mixed unequal parts of colors, like the top one on your little picture, I put an up arrow, which means like there was more concentration of one color than the other. But otherwise, then they were just equal parts. And maybe I would add some white in the corner so you could see how that tint would affect the color. But these cards, they've been incredibly useful to help build my color intelligence, because even the experience of making the cards was valuable. Even if I would have made them and thrown them away, I learned a lot just in the process of mixing systematically all these different colors. But then beyond that, having the recipes that I could immediately go to, that was very valuable. But also, it's been interesting to be able to take colors. Let me just grab a couple here. And, mix them, put them together. Make a collection of colors. Maybe I wouldn't have painted these colors together, but maybe I like them. So it gave me some opportunity to play with color combinations without wasting any paint. So that was very helpful to me. Now, I've been doing this now about 10 years, and so I don't often use these much, but occasionally still I'll be painting something and I feel like it looks a little lifeless in this corner, and I'll rifle through the cards and just take turns just holding up a color to my painting and say, what would it look like if I added that color? And so it's a way that I can, not risk messing up my painting by inserting a color that doesn't belong. I can kind of try before I buy using these. So often I would take my reference photo that I wanted to paint from, lay it down, and then go through these cards and put the cards of the colors that I was going to need right on top of my reference photo. Like if the building was red, I could, burnt sienna, I'd find the burnt sienna card and put it on top of that. And so I planned my colors, and then I could really efficiently go into my paint bin, and I knew exactly what I needed to get the effect I was looking for. So, yes.
You want your selection of colors to represent the picture that you did. there any element of like taste or liking that enters into your decision-making process?
Sometimes, well, and sometimes the photos that I take, the weather may not be that good on the day that I took the photo, you know, and I want to make it look warmer. And so that's an instance where my personal taste, my preference for warmer colors is going to take over. And even though the original reference photo might have been muted, overcast, I want to inject some warmer tones into that. So then I'll kind of pull the palette in that direction and choose everything to be a little bit warmer than the actual photo. So that's a good question that I'm not always 100% matching what the photo shows. But if I need to match what the photo shows, the cards have certainly been helpful to doing that. So, all right, I think then we are, okay, we're moving on to quadrants, and then we're going to get to demoing something. So a lot of times people ask how I get started working on a painting. You know, do I sketch it out? Do I use grid lines or anything like that? And when I first got started, I felt like the sketch was really critical, and I would spend tons of time making this great sketch only to paint on top of it and lose the sketch. And sometimes I did it completely, the painting ended up being completely different from the charcoal sketch beneath anyway. So I've gradually kind of honed my system where I don't really sketch with charcoal anymore. Instead, what I often do is I break my reference photo into quadrants, and I break my canvas into quadrants. So what that used to look like is taking my charcoal and just going zoop, zoop, and that was my quadrants, so it's pretty simple. Now, I don't know if you can see, but there's just a tiny little dot in the middle. Now I commonly just start with a little dot right in the middle. And from there I have like implied quadrants. I can tell which, you know, is each corner here. And then as far as my reference photo, breaking that into quadrants, usually I keep my photos that I'm going to paint on my iPad, and I love the app Procreate. Has anyone used Procreate? Okay, some of you have. Procreate, it's not a free app. It's like $10, but you only have to buy it once. It's not a subscription. It's a very handy photo editing tool that you can use. But the one feature that I love about it that I use the most is the ability to add grid lines. And so I can right on my iPad divide the photo into quadrants, just like my canvas. And so that kind of makes that simple. And then once I've established my quadrants, then I move on to the step that I call roughing it in. And that's just kind of figuring out where I'm going to put stuff and approximately what colors I'm going to use. So I think on your handout there, I had added kind of my own little phrase for this, is that you are saving the space and claiming the color. So I think both of those are important. You know, when we start with a plain white canvas, it can, you know, like here's our plain white canvas, it can get kind of overwhelming. You just see this big space and you're like, okay, I'm going to put something cool there. But, you know, there's just a lot of white and it just can be overwhelming. And sometimes people get like painting paralysis where there's like too much blank canvas and they just are afraid to make that first mark. And I always tell my students, I'm like, don't worry about doing it right. Do it wrong, but do it. Like, get something on the canvas that you can refine and fix. But if you don't have anything on there to start with, there's nothing to refine, and then your painting doesn't really go anywhere. So at least get something on there.
Do you ever tone your canvases?
I have not really been one to tone my canvases, not in the traditional sense. Like, I know people will do like a whole wash, like all over. I don't do that. But a little bit what I do kind of goes with this roughing it in concept, where I will take kind of a dry brush. So I'm going to do this. This is a similar size. This is just canvas paper. Normally I work from my photo to the canvas, but this time we're going to work a little bit backwards. We already have the painting, and we're going to kind of go backwards and see a little bit about how this one might have started. I just kind of like to block in some of the shapes with a color that is kind of similar to the color I'm going for. So for instance, you know, I see there's some significant lines. Like this is kind of a line, that's kind of a line, this is kind of a line. Even though this is irregular, we've kind of got a line here, and then we've got this little pointy thing here. So let me set this over here. So really, I squirted out and I won't need all of these for this particular painting, but I scored out some of the colors that I thought I'd need. So I have a raw umber. This is an ultramarine blue. This is a Naples yellow. Those will be the ones that I would be using kind of for this. So really just kind of, let me set, I'm gonna hold this at the same time. But really just kind of not being super precise here. Just kind of establishing some of these shapes. And I'm not panicking, you know, this is too narrow, that doesn't look good, but I'm not panicking about that because I'm just trying to compartmentalize the canvas with what's gonna go where. So I'm just kind of building that. Let's put a line down here. So now we've just got a few key lines in place. Let's see, let's bring this down here. And we've got a little building here, down, and then about there. So now this is not looking like much at all. And that's really how all my paintings start. Then I like to take, now I'm gonna get a little more precise with this. So I've just made some of the key lines with a color that I feel like will work with the painting. The next one I'm gonna pick, let's see, I'll do the ground here. In this zone, I'm just gonna kind of indicate, this is where the cobblestone street is. So you're kind of just starting to get a little bit of a sense of what the composition is, that the canvas is getting less and less white, less and less blank as I'm working. Next up, I'm gonna take a little Naples yellow, which isn't gonna be this is, if you look up close here, there's a lot of colors that are layered on here, so Naples is really only a small part of this color combination. But I'm just gonna kind of take some Naples with a dry brush. So this is not washing the canvas like you're saying, but I am kind of putting down like some background colors. And I'm trying to kind of respect the direction of the final strokes. Like in this case, I'm going vertically because in this building, you can see there's a lot of vertical lines in here. And in the foreground here where this roadway is, you can see it's going to be kind of horizontal lines. So I'm maintaining that consistency. I'm behaving similarly during this part of the process. So then I'm going to take this and let's see, we'll do a little of this. And then I see there's like kind of a big brown chunk right here. So I'm going to take some of this and I'm not stressing about this because this is a part of the process that can get very stressful. But you see, it's gradually taking shape. And now these are going to be really imprecise. These like scoopy window things here. I'm sure that's what they're technically called. But the scoopy window things, I'm just very crudely putting them in. And I'm totally not stressing about that they're not the right size or, their edge is too long or they're wonky or whatever. I'm not doing that. I'm just kind of filling them in, just starting to get a sense of them. Then there's, a line above them. There's another line above them. There's like a window here. There's a window here. There's some kind of rectangular thing here. I'm just starting to suggest some things. And so this is a very simplified way of sketching, but I'm using some of the actual color that I would use. Then let me choose another brush. Then for the sky, I think my actual sky is like Prussian and ultramarine. I just have ultramarine on my palette right now though. So I'm just gonna kind of maintain that same consistency of direction. So you wouldn't want to be going like this. Sometimes I see people come to my classes and they try to do a sky and they are going like up and down. And I'm like, have you ever seen the sky? Have you ever seen the wind blow like that? I'm like, you've got to keep your movements, like think intelligently about what you're painting. So now even though this is very thin amounts of paint, it will be a layer that I would build upon to continue making this. So now I'm kind of straightening up this little tower thing a little bit here. Then there's another little tower thingy back here. and a little line that comes down here. There's a couple little windows. I guess I'll take a little cadmium yellow. So do you see, it's just a very crude drawing, but you start to get a sense of what the painting is going to be. And I feel like I can paint so much better when I have a sense of what it's going to be. When there's so much white and I'm like really concentrating on just getting that road right and everything else is blank, I freak out and it slows me down, slows down my progress. And I feel like kind of starting like this, also there's kind of a key line here. I feel like starting like this helps me have a unified approach to the whole painting. That's another thing I see students do is they'll start on like this tower here because this is kind of the fun part to paint. Maybe it's like, you know, kind of charming and little turret there. People will work on getting like that really good and they'll spend all their best energy right there. And then they get tired and they have to paint the rest of the scene, you know, and I get tired too sometimes, but I want it to look like the same artist who did the tower did all the rest of it also. And so to kind of keep that momentum and that unified feel, for me, it helps if I kind of rough this much in and then I hop around and I add to or I correct. You know, if I realize that I made some line too tilted or not tilted enough, I just go over it with more paint because paint covers paint. And so it's not really a big deal. And if I have like thick paint there, then I can scrape it off if I need to with a palette knife. So that's kind of how I like to rough something in. Before I go any further, I wanted to pass this around. This is a small painting and it's very dry, so you'll be safe to touch it. But normally you can't touch art. That one I'm going to let you all touch just so you can get a feel for the amount of texture, the amount of paint that is actually on that. There's an awful lot of paint on there.
So you could put your art out in the pond tour.
Yeah.
My art would possibly be okay. It would possibly be okay. Yeah. So that's a little bit of roughing it in. But I want to show you a little bit of my process of creating texture because right now there's not really any texture. This is very, very thin paint. And, you know, it's a common principle to start with thin paint and then build on top of it. And that's often what I do, especially if I'm doing a really complicated architectural scene. Like this scene here, there's a lot of detailed architecture. So I have to be a little more precise. So I really like this kind of roughing it in, sketching with paint process.
Do you let it dry between layers? Or?
No, I usually keep working while it's wet. I like to paint on wet paint. I feel like there's a good fluid movement. There's less friction with the brush. So yeah, I love to paint when it's really thick and when it's very wet. So now the next one I'm going to do, and I know it'll be a little bit of a waste of a canvas, but because we're not going to quite finish it. We're not going to get anywhere near finishing it because I see we're almost out of time. But I want to show you, how I would start a sky for a very thickly textured painting. And this is going to be really a different approach. So that one down there, like I said, I was being a little more step by step, a little more systematic because of the complicated architecture. But if I was doing something more like that ocean scene where there's not really any firm structure, I don't have to stress too much about the lines. I'm going to do this will be a very simple cherry blossom scene, which like a cooking show, I have like this will be the start, and then it'll be like when they put it in the oven and then they pull it out and they're like, look, because we need to fast forward a bit because I can't paint a painting in, 5 minutes here. But I want to show you how I'd start a sky. So many times I will just take the paint tube and squirt it straight onto the canvas. It's a big tube. Yes, all my tubes are this big because I go through a ton of paint.
How much does something like that cost?
Usually about $16. Yeah. So yeah, they're not cheap to have a collection of them. But so I will often just take the paint. I know, it's kind of cringe-worthy, isn't it? It hurts, doesn't it? I know, it hurts, I know.
This may be your best work.
Can I just leave it like this? And then, with some clouds, I'm going to have white in it also. So this is cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is always a safe sky color. You know, sometimes I have where I add a little, I think there's a little bit of like dioxazine purple into the ocean sky. You know, sometimes there's cobalt blue. Sometimes there's a little ultramarine or a little Naples yellow. There's variety you can add to the sky. But cerulean is always a safe bet. And then I'm going to put some white on there. And the reason that I structured it like this, where the blue on the top and then the white underneath, is because oftentimes in the sky, if you take a photo, the intensity of the blue usually looks darker up at the top, and then it kind of fades to white down low. And from here, see if I'm supposed to be on the screen here, but I'm taking my brush and I'm just moving it around, just kind of flattening.
And you use little brushes like that?
Honestly, this is a bigger brush than I usually use.
Wow.
I wanted to get something a little bigger so it would go a little bit faster for all of you watching. But commonly, like this is one I really like. I know. I maybe it would go better if I used big brushes, but I do love the little brushes. I like that they do give some control. And a word about control, one of the classes that I teach, my intermediate class, we do an exercise where we take a 3-foot-long dowel rod and we tape a paintbrush to the end of the dowel rod, and then we paint a sky. And if you've ever wanted to try to like paint loosely, but you feel like you're your own worst enemy because you you crave that control, it's so hard to let go of that like stiff, grip on the brush. But tape your paintbrush to a 3-foot-long dowel rod and stand 3.5 feet back and try to paint a sky.
Like that.
You can even just use a piece of computer paper. Like that's what we use in my class. Everyone has a clipboard and a computer paper, and we set the clipboard on the easel and you stand way back and you try to paint a sky. It's kind of a fun activity. So now I'm gonna kind of start smooshing, and smooshing is the technical art word here. Start smooshing the white. And I'm just kind of working them together a little bit. I'm trying to respect having the darker color at the top and more white at the bottom. And if I goof this up where I get I carry too much white up here, I just add more blue. It's not a big deal. Or I could always take a palette knife and scrape off if need be. But I think what's really important here is the hopping around element. Smooshing and hopping around. The other word that I use all the time when I teach that people find funny is squidgling. And squidgling is very important. You know what squidgling? It's a combination between a wiggle and a squish. You squidgle it. So when in that big painting over there with all the flowers, there's a lot of squidgling. If you look up close, in the foreground to get those stray, leafy, grassy shapes, you squish and wiggle. Squidgling. So anyway, you heard it here first. So I'm just kind of smooshing these colors in here. And I usually, with a sky, one corner ends up being a little bit more blue than the other. I feel like that also looks a little bit natural just because the way the light flows in the sky. So I will not get this whole thing done, so don't worry. You're not going to be sitting here for...
Would you be painting this fast if we weren't watching and you were painting this guy?
Well, I'd probably have the smaller brush, so that would be a slowing down point. Sometimes I'm faster than others. But I do, actually on my Instagram, I have a couple of little videos of me painting skies, and it is kind of, they are sped up videos, I guess they're time lapse, but I am painting pretty fast, I guess, for the sky.
Do you have any favorite brand brushes or?
That's a good question. I like cheap brushes. I like inexpensive brushes, not cheap. I guess there's a distinction. One time I went to this fancy art store and I bought a $60 brush, and I thought it was really going to take my paintings to the next level, except I was terrified to ever use the brush because that became known as the special brush. So the $60 brush didn't really help me, even though it was all the fancy brushiness. It was not something I felt comfortable using. So what I generally like to do is, this is just Royal and Langnickel, I think. I like their brushes. So they're an inexpensive brush that's not cheap. So I don't want dollar store, Walmart style cheap. I want real brushes. But I use artist brushes, yes. But I'm not stressed about trying to get really expensive ones. I'd rather have ones that I don't feel like I have to really protect, you know, or like save for something special. I feel like it kind of taking the pressure off helps me paint better. So, all right, so we're I'm gonna just do a quick bit of cloud here. Well, let's see. So imagine if this whole thing is covered, and I'll show you part 2 in just a moment. But when I add clouds into a scene, I often look where concentrations of the white are a little bit heavier already. So like here I see, you know, there's a little bit of white. Here there's more white. So I might take some white and just kind of start to build my clouds, you know, where the white is just naturally accumulating in my painting. And then now this is getting really contaminated with the blue because I'm trying to go really fast. But this is something that I would often kind of let set up. And then tomorrow I'd go back in when this is not as smeary blue, and I would add more pure white on top of it and start making my clouds. But you can see how I went with just naturally seeing where I saw a little bit more white settle. Then I start to add a little bit of a cloud shape, and then the next time I painted, I would add more and more and more white in order to make it look like a cloud. So then to do the Food Network switcheroo here, I have one that's a little bit further along, still not done, but this is the direction that we're going. So you can see just some of the general clouds have now been added. I've added the trees. I've obviously added the grass. So at this point, then I'd be looking, you know, to add some highlight because the grass is kind of dead looking. It's just all looking a very uniform green. So I'm picking up some cadmium yellow and a little bit of green. I like working with paint that isn't thoroughly mixed. So I attended a workshop, and the artist that we were working with was calling this broken color, and I really like that concept, where you have both colors distinctly separate, but then I'm going to put them on together. And so it kind of creates some, you know, some real interest where you see some concentration of the yellow.
They're actually using 2 brushes.
This is one brush. One brush, yeah.
One brush, 2 colors.
One brush, 2 colors, yeah. So this just kind of gives you an idea of how like the broken color can be used in a thick application style. To kind of add some life. I'm only going to do this side of the path. So you can kind of appreciate like how the path on the grass on the other side, you know, it just has much more of a flat, kind of dead feel. And this already has like some vibrant movement. You know, the fact that it captures my brush strokes and just kind of freezes them. And then with that broken color, and then like this is a cool extra thick blob. I like that. So I try to just kind of let the paint happen as I'm putting it down, and then like lean into the spaces that I really like that have turned out well. And if there's something that I'm like, oh no, I don't like that blob, then I just scrape it off and paint it, you know, differently. But
blob is so you.
What's that?
It's so you.
There it goes. Yes.
I didn't mean it in a negative way.
No, yeah.
Emotionally connecting you to
Yes, and that totally circles back to what I said at the beginning, that you need to choose something where your heart and your voice and your emotions and all of that can be expressed. And I feel like when I paint like this, that kind of my enthusiasm, my energy, I'm having fun. Often at home when I'm painting, you know, I will have fun music playing, and it's kind of like dancing. And my brush strokes, the application is almost like part of a dance.
Paint what you love.
Paint what you love, yes. So that kind of gives you a glimpse into, you know, how I do some of this. But one last thing I'd want to say is that, you know, sometimes I'll paint something, and once I get it like kind of done, where I feel like it's all I want to do for now. I'll set it aside, and I feel like it needs to simmer, like a pot of chili. I like to just set it aside and have it in a spot of my home where I'm going to walk by a million times and look at it for a couple of weeks. And sometimes I'll notice something like really off, and I'll change it completely, even 2 or 3 weeks later. So it's never really, really done. It's done when, whenever you say it is. But just kind of like to wrap up, yes, I'm trying to paint things that I love. I'm trying to communicate my heart and my voice and enthusiasm. But I do always feel like I have to give credit to God for the ability to do any of this, because especially the fact that this was not my intended path in life. I started out as a math and science teacher. Being an artist was absolutely never, ever, ever on the radar. Even when I signed up for that first painting class, I was just going to be in a 6-week painting class and then never paint again. But I was so hooked and captivated, and I feel like every door just opened for me after that. And a wise friend had told me, he said, God's the one who's the real artist. You're just obedient and you hold the brush. And I feel like that attitude has really impacted the trajectory of what I do and why I do it and why I love to encourage other people to do it. So any questions before you all run for the snacks? I know you're all like, ooh, the snacks look good. All right. Well, if you think of anything, I'll be here for, a little bit. So come on up and ask me some questions. Thank you all for being a good audience.
Thank you.
What's that?
Is that one you just were painting on, is that from a photo as well?
This one was, I chose this composition specifically for the demonstration purposes, because there were certain things I was looking for. I wanted high texture, simple, loose scene, and some bold color that would be easily visible in the room. So this one was chosen specifically for this purpose. Yeah.
When did you take your 6-week course? How long ago?
About 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you go ongoing to his class?
No, I haven't taken classes for quite a few years now, but that class was enough to really give me the push that I needed to get started. And I did take more beyond that, and then I've done other workshops and classes with others, and and a lot of independent study as well.
Do you always paint in oils?
So I do a little bit of watercolor. I do some ink sketching. I have acrylics, and I have painted with them when I've needed to. I don't love painting with acrylics. I really, more than anything, I love the oil paints. And so I kind of feel like rather than try to be good at 10,000 things, I feel like I'd end up being mediocre at 10,000 things. So I'd really rather just kind of focus my energies into the one that really appeals to me.
And are those odorless?
They're not odorless. Some of them smell more than others, and we're in a big open room with good airflow. No, and I get nose blind to it because I'm around it all the time. But sometimes I'll come in the room where I've been painting, and if the door's been closed, and I come in, I'm like, whew, okay, I can smell that. So sometimes.
Medium?
I don't use any medium. I have some terpenoid or liquin or Gamsol. And so on rare occasion, if there's something that I really need to be precise and I need the paint to flow like ink, I will occasionally use it, but it's exceptionally seldom. I pretty much just paint with straight paint right out of the tube.
And what, do you stick to one brand, or are you using multiple brands of paint?
I use a few different brands. One that I use for a lot of my initial layers is the Winton oils by Winsor & Newton. So they're a student grade oil, but they're really quality pigments, and they hold up well. I also have some Utrecht. The ones that I have the most fun using that I didn't bring just because they are very, very expensive are my Sennelier paints. So if anyone's familiar with Sennelier, it is the art store. It's a family. The Sennelier family was a family of chemists in Paris around the time that Monet and Van Gogh and Renoir, all those famous guys were painting, and many of them got their supplies from the Sennelier store. So I've actually gotten to go to the Sennelier store that they shopped at and shop. And then I've ordered stuff from the U.S. also. So I do feel like there's a little something extra special when I use my Sennelier paints. So I feel a little extra connected with my love of the Impressionists when I get to use, their brand of paints.
Did you use some of the
Oh, I'm sure. Yes, I love, especially in the sky. I use a lot of the Sennelier paints. Their cerulean blue is really, really particularly pretty. I feel like it's livelier looking than the Winton blue.
Well, you know, Cheap Joe's is going out of business.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you might be able to get some deals on some.
Oh, I hate to hear when a store's going out of business.
Think about it, yeah.
Do they have them online? I tried going online, I couldn't.
I did order.
Cheap Joe's.
Cheap Joe's.
Okay.
Hard stuff, yeah.
Well, I need Blick and Jerry's Artorama to keep going because
Yeah, I mean, it's getting,
it's getting hard to find stuff.
so I did order.
Oh, yeah.
But
Well, that's
they're being bombarded, so I have to wait quite a while before it arrives. That's okay.
well, yeah. It's always good to get your order in before you need it.
So,
Yeah, I'm always ordering paint. My husband's always like, "What? We got another box of paints on the front porch." Like, it can't run out. I always have to have them.
the Sennelier watercolor also?
I haven't used the Sennelier watercolor. No. Are they good? Okay.
And the pastels are phenomenal.
When we were in the Sennelier store, has anyone been to the Sennelier store in Paris? You've been there? So one of the most impactful things of that visit was that they had mason jars of like ground up pigment from the earth, like soil from different geographic regions of the world. And I guess I knew that real pigments were in the paints, but I didn't really know what pigments were. They were just like colors. It was just an abstract thought. But when I saw those mason jars and it would say like soil from the Himalayas, I was like, oh, there's dirt from the Himalaya mountains that's in that color. Like, it was really cool to see the ground up earth materials that go into making the pigments that we paint with. That it's not just color, it's actual stuff.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you so much for having me.